Hello, this is Colin, and this is today's tea. Well, if we remember I was talking earlier about the Ming. Well, the Ming period of China is very important to tea because it was around that time that the Europeans started establishing relationship with China from overseas. Now, there had been Europeans such as Marco Polo who had gone to China over land, but of course, coming back overland, there's a limit to how much you can carry. Plus, there's all those Islamic countries in the way between you and China, which kind of made it difficult. But when the Europeans figured out how to go down under Africa and up to Asia, well, those relatively big for the time, those big carracks or ships, trading ships that Europeans had, could carry back a lot of extremely valuable cargo. Now, the two main rivals in East Asia at the time were the Portuguese, representing the Catholics, and the Dutch, representing the Protestants. And the rivalry could get quite deadly. The Dutch, I was reading a book on the Dutch East India Company, and their attempts to, success in actually monopolizing the trade in certain spices was managed quite ruthlessly. The things that they did to corner the nutmeg trade would keep you up at nights. But one place the Dutch were not able to establish a trading relationship, the Portuguese had beat them to it, was with China. So in, 16 something or other, the Japanese were tired of the Portuguese, so they actually got Dutch ships and Dutch guns and Dutch help to expel the Portuguese from Japan, which meant that the Dutch had, I think, a monopoly on trade with Japan. So, weirdly enough, the first teas to arrive in Europe in bulk actually came from Japan. These would have been green teas, and, of course, the Dutch loved nothing more than monopoly. So for the longest time, they had the exclusive trade with Japan, and they were the only ones in Northern Europe to trade in tea. So if you wanted tea, you had to go to the Dutch. Made the Dutch very wealthy this way. It's also a curious fact that coffee, chocolate, and tea arrived in Europe about the same time. I suppose that's, an example of what happens with the age of exploration, but from very different places, of course. Coffee coming from the failed Turkish siege of Vienna in, 1688 or something. But only a few years after coffee arrived, so did tea. And the reason, this is very interesting, the reason we call orange pekoe was not because it's orange. I always thought because it was sort of orange colored. No, it was called orange pekoe because orange is the color of the king of Holland. It's the royal color, which confuses me because I thought the Dutch were a republic. But yes, it's the royal color for Holland, so that's why it was called orange pekoe. I mean, the name we give things sometimes can be almost completely random. For example, tea, T-E, as we call it, was called that because the Dutch were dealing with Amoy in China, and in that dialect, that's what you called it. Whereas the Portuguese, who were operating from Macau, which was a Portuguese colony on China, they called it cha, C-H-A-A, which is apparently the Cantonese pronunciation. And also, black tea was known as bohe, or bohe, because the black teas came from the Bohe Mountains in China. Well, so I guess the Dutch managed to start trading with the Chinese eventually. Otherwise, we would be calling it by the Japanese name. Anyway, so if you're drinking orange pekoe, you can thank the Dutch. And, one last note. In 1662, Catherine of Braganza, a Portuguese lady, married Charles II of England. thus bringing tea to England, to the court circles, and making it a must-have item for the nobility. Cheers.